quorum in the room. We actually have quorum in the room, as well as folks that are joining us out in Zoom land. So welcome, welcome. It's nice to be back in a room with people again. So we'll go through the on our agenda. We've taken our roll call. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome Stephen Lewis to the meeting. He's with us in the room today. Stephen is our new agricultural representative. So welcome, Stephen. I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself. Just press the middle button on your microphone.
Well, thank you for that. It is indeed an honor to be part of this prestigious team I've heard so much about, and I'm anxious to work with you folks. I don't know, just a little bit about me, I guess. I was been involved in many farm organizations over the years. Spent the last 2 terms of Goulburn Council before amalgamation came and Eli and his gang took over. Since then, I've had 15 years in the city's Committee of Adjustment, and I'm still there. And currently we run an 800-acre cash crop farm down at Ashton, 15 minutes or so from here. And I'm not real sure what I want to be when I've grown up, but I'm sure I'd like to explore the possibilities. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. And we're getting used to being in a room together, folks. So I'll have you take a look at the agenda. Could I have somebody move that the agenda for our meeting today be adopted as presented? Moved by Faye, seconded by Eli. All in favor? You just raise your hands up on line 2. Motion is carried. Next, we'll take a look at the minutes from our last meeting. Could I have somebody move that the minutes of the Board of Directors meeting held on April the 18th be received and approved as printed? Moved by Chuck, seconded by, I'll pick Paul because he had his hand up before. All in favor of adopting the minutes, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Motion is carried. I should mention that at this time, if you have any, this is the time to mention if you have anything to declare vis-a-vis conflict of interest in the agenda. You can raise it now with us or at the time we reach that item in the agenda. Moving further down our main business is we have the receipt of the minutes from the Executive Committee dated November the 12th. We'd have no motion for that. I'm also getting myself used to working with a pile of paper in front of people. Should be glad I'm wearing pants, folks. This is a first in a long time. Item 3 on our agenda is the watershed conditions report, and I'll turn the floor over to Jen North.
Can everyone hear me? Jen, we're getting some. How about this? Can you hear me now? Okay, that's better. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm just going to call up your presentation, Jen. Great. Okay, you're good to go. Perfect, great. Afternoon, everyone. So I'll give a brief update on the current conditions. Over the past few weeks, flows have been dropping naturally, leaving the majority of the flows and levels in the watershed sitting around normal for this time of year. As you can see in the graph, I've also plotted 2019 and the year 2021. 2019 was a flood year and 2021 was a below average year. You can kind of see where we sit in between those kind of drastic differences. We are very close to normal. Jen, we're having a difficult time understanding you. Can you move closer to your mic, please? Sure. So we do have some rain in the forecast, but we don't expect any high waters to occur. And we expect to have stable summer levels for the start of the recreational season next weekend. We are still replacing logs. The last few logs in the upper part of the watershed, leaving most of the upper lakes at their summer target levels. We were concerned about filling Shabamika Lake after construction delays, but that lake has done well over the past few weeks, and we are sitting within 5 centimeters from summer target. So we'll definitely hit target by the end of May. And as you can see in the graph, Crotch Lake, we are sitting just below normal, similar to what we are seeing in the rest of the watershed. We will keep this elevation as stable as we can over the next month and a half until we start drawing down the lake in the beginning of July. Still giving us lots of storage for any substantial rainfall events we have over the next month. So once summer levels are set for this weekend, we will manage the system to keep these levels as stable as possible. Whether it will be a wet summer or dry summer remains to be seen. The long range forecast, if you go to the next slide, the long range forecast is predicting a slightly warmer, slightly drier June. So hopefully we'll be able to keep lots of water in the system going into the summer months. And we will continue to monitor the system closely and hope for a normal, uneventful summer. That's everything.
Thank you very much, Jen.
No problem.
If anybody has questions for Jen, just either raise your hand virtually if you're out in Zoom or in real time here in the room. Any questions for Jen? Any comments about the report, folks? Seeing none, thanks a lot, Jen.
Great.
See you next time.
You too.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 4 in the agenda, which is an action plan for reducing and mitigating workplace stress report. Before we get to the motion, I'm going to have Sally present the report. It's a lengthy motion.
We're just going to try to address this technical issue here at our end. Maybe do we want to shut it down again? Oh, there, now it's working. Previous. Okay, yeah, if you want to start there, that'd be great. Which one? Which
I was
method?
pressing one of those guys.
Oh, okay,
This one needed down.
okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh, no. Previous. Okay. Hooray. Okay, apologies for that delay. So I'm just going to adjust the view here so that we can see this better. Okay, so back in February of 2020, the Joint Health and Safety Committee raised to my attention that there were issues with stress in the workplace. And the following month, a response to the Joint Health and Safety Committee was drafted by myself with the chair at the time, which was Janet Mason. And we embarked on several actions to address workplace stress. At that time, there was discussion that we would go on to conduct an employee survey, but literally that same month, the pandemic hit. And I would say for the next several months, we were very much engrossed in trying to cope with that as well as other issues in the workplace. So some of the drivers, the variables that have been impacting the organization have been externally driven as opposed to internally. And this spreadsheet, or not spreadsheet, this slide basically outlines some of the key things that the organization has been facing both externally, starting with the flood of 2017, and then subsequently the 2018 flood. the various things that have been happening at the provincial level that have been stressors to many people in the workplace. We also had 2 network breaches that needed to be accommodated, and then a fantastic housing boom that I'm sure your own planning staff have been trying to deal with. And then, of course, the pandemic that has affected us all. Some of the internal variables that have affected the organization were that over the first 2, 2019, 2020, we saw a retirement of half of the leadership team. So about over 100 years of experience walked out the door. And unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of documentation of the kind of work that they did and how they did it. So in terms of succession planning, that was challenging for the new management team that came in. And of course, new managers, different styles, different approaches, et cetera. And so that would compound, challenges people were experiencing. And then, of course, we had our own workload pressures within the organization, things that we were mandated to do by this board that we were pursuing. So, and then you couple that with, and you can't see it, it's the very last point actually, with just the standard operational challenges that any organization is faced with in terms of business processes, internal communications, all that sort of just normal stuff. It's been a challenging past 3 years. So I'm showing you this slide because when an organization goes through significant change, these are in management theory, the key stages it goes through. It starts with forming, like it takes time for a new group of people, mandated to do some work together to just come together as a unit. And usually there is a period of, you move from forming to storming where, it's not easy because you're trying to figure things out amongst the new group and how you're going to work together. Then as you sort of get your business processes and your methods and who does what underway, you're normalizing business processes. And then at a certain point you take off, like now you're, a well-working machine and you're performing. And so those are the typical stages that any kind of team development goes through. And I would say that we had a protracted period of this because of all these variables internally and externally driven in the organization. And despite taking several actions over the past 3 years to try to mitigate workplace stress, it just seems we get through one thing and then something else is, we're confronted with. So I would say, though, that I feel very much positive in that, where we are now as an organization. I think everybody collectively is feeling as we move out of COVID that we're moving into a phase where we're able to resume operations the way we'd like to. We just recently, with the board's approval in February, were able to hire additional staff to help address some of the workload issues. And with the work that Tegan and Krista undertook in terms of workshops with the staff that they'll speak to, we've been able to sort of refine, okay, what are the key priority things we need to be working on and focusing on now? I think, okay, sorry, before I turn it over to them, one of the key issues that came out was vertical trust. And I just wanted to raise with you that it's not identified within the action plan as a individual area with several actions. All the actions combined that are identified in the action plan will help, I feel, to build vertical trust because it's those other actions that are getting at the root causes of why there is a breakdown in vertical trust within the organization. So now, okay, I just wanted to highlight here the work that's undergone in the past year. So as we were, last summer, a year ago summer, this time, we thought we were coming out of the pandemic. So we started work on trying to do the staff survey. And so by August, we did the survey. September, we got the results. October, they were reviewed with the Joint Health and Safety Committee, and we developed a bit of a short-term action plan. And based upon the results at that time, we determined we really needed workshops with staff to flesh out some of the things that had been identified in the survey. And so the results of the survey and the work plan were tabled with the executive committee, and they agreed with the proposed approach. So then we retained PSHSA in December. They were supposed to do the workshops in January, but we were in lockdown again. So we finally got them done in February. In March, we got the results. In April, we, developed the action plan. The action plan has been circulated to all members of staff, and we received feedback to them from them on it. The action plan was amended, and that's what you have before you today. So now I'll turn it over to our friends Tegan and Christine. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can call up their presentation, and hopefully I won't have any problems with that.
Do you want me to call that up?
Yeah,
Okay.
there we go. Share. Whoops, did it do it? No, hold
that
on.
okay
Oh,
if
there
I
it is.
share?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I'm sharing the presentation.
Go for it. And you just prompt me when you want me to change the slide.
I think I'm sharing mine.
Oh, do you have
So
it there? Oh,
Yeah,
pardon me.
I just put it
Okay.
on the board if that's okay. Does that
That's
work
great.
for you? Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you so much. I appreciate you putting us on the agenda today for a very important topic for some work that we've been working with MVCA on. And I'll go through short slides. We are going to leave time for questions at the end. I know that everyone's received a copy of our report. So if there's questions now or in the future, feel free to contact us. So we always like to start with a few slides at the beginning. PSHSA, we're a safe work association in the province of Ontario. We serve, we're considered a designated entity under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and we're partially funded through the premiums that employers pay to WSIB for their premiums to go back to prevention activities for health and safety in the province. So we serve just over 1.5 million workers across 10,000 workplaces within the public sector, including the emergency services, education, healthcare, government, and First Nations. And we've been working with, or I personally have been working with MVCA probably going on to over 10 years. I thought I'd first kind of bring up the slide with respect to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the need for that it's based on the internal responsibility system within an organization and the workplace parties all playing their roles with respect to keeping workplaces safe right from the top, which is yourselves, the board of directors and of the corporation, to make sure that health and safety is integrated into the day-to-day activities of the organization right through the senior leadership, supervisors, and worker levels. And it really goes down and delegates authority, going down and then coming back up to ensure that health and safety needs are met within the organization to an acceptable level. This slide kind of overviews that psychological hazards are not new hazards. They are hazards that have always been in the workplace, maybe ones that have not necessarily been at the top in the forefront when we're looking at in the past, machine hazards and various other hazards where we have the potential, greater potential for death and for critical injury. But when we look at hazards in the workplace and how they contribute to, injury, psychological hazards would be similar to any other hazard in the workplace, like, for example, MSD hazards or lack of ergonomics in the workplace. We look at those risk factors that will increase the risk in an organization for individuals to be strained or workers to be strained due to workplace or organizational factors. And as I can on the side there, posture, force, and repetition would be what we'd be looking at, let's say for an ergonomic, where things like work hours, workload, autonomy, communication, leadership expectations, cognitive demands, work environment. There's a lot of research that points to what are the workplace factors, organizational factors that contribute to these hazards in the workplace. This slide is quite comprehensive. It was put together when we're looking at what would a psychological health and safety program look like to an organization. Similar to if you were looking at a WMIS program for chemical hazard management or an ergonomics program, machine hazard safety program, we always want to look at initially that hazard recognition and control. And in this case, when we look at the recognition, we're really looking at the organizational psychosocial factors in the workplace. We're looking at various other aspects of your workplace as to what you may or may not have already in place. We do look at, as we start integrating this into our health and safety management systems, we really look at being more comprehensive in the identification, but then supporting it through, training and education and various other, doing type tasks or intervention type tasks where individuals or workers feel the ability to look at reporting incidences in the workplace and having a formal procedure to report those, similar to what we would do for other types of hazards in the workplace. There are other things that are of importance when we're looking at return to work and post-incident response. As many of you may know, with the municipalities and looking at our emergency responders and our PTSD plans, many municipalities have also looked at incorporating that within their organization for other sectors or for other occupations or roles. So I wanted to get into, and I know I only have like 5 minutes. So in my mind, I'm trying to take all this information. Some of the key findings from the stress assess questionnaire that was sent out to staff were noted to be these 5 factors. And that was where it came in. Sally said that they looked at now looking at focus groups, or that's where PSHSA came in to try and get more information as to how is this impacting, where are we looking for solutions, what could be done in the workplace that could help us to then develop an internal action plan to deal with these findings. So this slide, the next slide is quite busy, but I thought if I was going to provide one slide for the results, this would be the best one because the report itself speaks to all of these sections and looks at those areas and areas of concern and issues that have come to play that become pertinent within the various topics. For example, staffing, as Sally had already indicated, staffing makes it difficult when you're looking at predictability of work or role conflicts or work pace. So those things are things within the information, the focus groups that were held with your employees as to trying to glean the information that's important for next steps. I'll leave the slide up for maybe a few seconds. I think it is in the report and the more detailed information is there as well. Again, this comes from focus groups. So it comes from the perceptions of the workers within the workplace. So when we're looking at priority for actions, a priority for actions, which was really looking at what we'd want or you should consider with respect to the action plan, or was considered towards the action plan, was really these were the main things coming out: staff skills and abilities, being that there are a lot of new staff. There's a lot of staff doing various different positions, etc. Organizational priorities is important, being that, as Sally had noted, there's been a housing boom that significantly increased the number of permits that need to be processed through your organization, as well as some changes, external changes as to various legislation and having greater responsibilities for other wetlands within the province, among other things. The communication within various levels of workplace parties, workload and workload demand, as we saw in the mind map or the previous slide, definitely came through on many different levels with respect to some of the stressors. connections and interactions within the organization as well is considered to be a priority for action. And the internal responsibility system, which is the first slide for any hazards in the workplace, really looking at the hazard identification and assessment and controls and putting them in place and really looking at the workplace priorities as per their roles and responsibilities and kind of going down the chain and then going back up the chain, ensuring that there's a method in which we can communicate the changes, but also have feedback as to how effective that they are. So when we look at psychological hazards in the workplace, if they're not addressed proactively, it does increase to injury, illness, as well as impacts the worker's ability to be able to do their work productively on a day-to-day basis due to stress, burnout, and other factors. So being that I've worked with MVCA for quite some time, you've always been a leader with respect to, in my minds, with respect to many of your different initiatives. So I am hopeful that looking at this information and trying to proactively put plans in place to improve or to work on improvement of many of these factors, similar to what we would do for other hazard management. So I did leave the information. We're more than happy to respond to any questions at the end of Sally's presentation on the action plan, or any questions that you might have on the report in future. Sally, if I'm gonna, and we don't have much time, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. If you want to stop sharing your screen.
I shall.
Great. And I think I just have one more slide to share with people. This really doesn't want to work. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned previously, the management team and the Joint Health and Safety Committee sort of roughed out ourselves what we thought were the key areas that we wanted to move forward with. And using that combined with the results of the work that PSHSA did, an action plan was drafted and circulated to everyone. And we had an anonymous poll where people could give feedback on what they felt were their top priorities in terms of the long list of actions in the action plan, which ones they wanted to see progress on in the short term. And also provide an opportunity for feedback if we were missing anything, et cetera. So the action plan you have in front of you, I think fairly captures the actions that need to be carried out. There's a lot of them, but these that you see here are the top 10 that staff identified. So you'll see the very first one is about ensuring that there's consistent communication between discussions that occur at the management team meetings. We have them bi-weekly, that information is shared with staff on a consistent basis. Also that we have at minimum a spring and fall staff meetings to share other sorts of meetings, information that we're having. We had our first spring post-COVID staff meeting actually just earlier this week, and I think it went well. You can see that, you know, because of workload and new people and not everybody having the same level of understanding in terms of the work that needs to be done and why it needs to be done a certain way, that that there was probably a failure in any number of areas in terms of making sure that people understood why they're being asked to do something, or given some of the context behind it to help them do it in an appropriate manner that they feel comfortable doing it. So management and supervisors have been sensitized to that. And definitely since this finding came in, which is now, several weeks ago, the management team and supervisors have been sensitized to this and have been acting on this. There was any number of training that was identified as being required. Number 6, with respect to transition plans, because of staff turnover and because in some cases we've actually done, in management speak, delete creates, where you actually eliminate one job to create a totally different new job. We've had to figure out different ways of achieving the work that those prior employees did when they left the organization. And so to varying degrees, that was either handled well or not so well, depending on how we were doing at the time and what the nature of that change was. We're making a very concerted effort, I would say, particularly since January. With this board's approval, we were able to hire another person who has been able to help in terms of documenting business processes and clarifying roles and responsibilities within the organization. And so that's been tremendously helpful in helping us make progress in that area. Also, you may recall that I presented to the board on our approach to grants going forward, that we just cannot be so ambitious in terms of going after every grant that there is out there, that there just isn't the work capacity, the people capacity in the building. You can say seize the day to grants, but it comes at a cost. And in this case, it's just too much work for too few people. We're continuing to trial the work at home and other alternative work arrangements to support people in work-life balance. And then also the fun events, to be able to break away at a certain point during the year and just enjoy each other's company and celebrate our successes. And then the last one is just, the basics of making sure, during COVID, we stopped stocking the kitchen. And so we need to restock the fridge, as it were, right? So it's quite soup to nuts in terms of what were the top 10 in the organization. But I think, that's our shopping list for in the immediate term. And some of those things, as I've mentioned, have already been undertaken and are in the works. So that's the action plan. Happy to take any questions, myself or Christine. And Christine, can you confirm, is Tegan on the phone or not?
She is. She's
Okay.
not feeling the best today, so I'll try
Okay.
and answer anything that I can. And if not, she may be able to pipe in there.
Yeah, so anybody can pose questions to any of us. Thank you.
Okay, folks, if you have any questions for Christine and Tegan or Sally about the report that's just come forward, we'll do that. If you have any gaps, then we'll move on to the main motion.
Who wants to handle who goes first? I see
Eli,
Glenn.
did you want to speak to the main motion or did you want to speak to? Okay.
And I need to stop sharing, so hold on a moment. There you go. Okay.
Okay, Glenn, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone for the presentation. I wanted to ask Christine, as a board, what should our role be in assisting or supporting in this effort?
The board's always responsible with respect to a very high level of compliance on occupational health and safety, and really the visioning towards an organization. And really you're holding the senior leadership or supervisory staff accountable to the actions occurring within the organization to deal with the action plan. So I would suggest keeping knowledgeable about the report and seeing as they progress throughout, as they put their action plan in place and addressing any issues as there are bumps in the road as it happens.
So in your view, the recommended plan and recommendations that are in front of us are, as it stands, are sufficient for that, achieving that level of board oversight that we should be having here?
To respond specifically to the recommendations of the action plan, because we were not involved in the action plan, we don't profess to be professionals within management consulting. That might not be the best question for me to answer if it's going to be sufficient. I think we did, in a role with respect to health and safety, provide you the information, and I think it's they've put actions in place, but that is everyone has to know their own specialties.
Okay, so ultimately, as a board, we should be certainly aware of the activities, monitoring the activities and their outcomes, and as we do with any other file, making sure we have appropriate oversight, and that would meet our formal requirements under the Act, but also our responsibilities to this organization in particular. So thank you for that. And I also wanted to ask Sally, on a similar line, what can we do as a board to support you as the leader of this organization in these efforts?
So I'd first like to thank the board for the additional funding you provided to allow us to staff up. The management team with employees, we're in a monitoring phase ourselves as we're using those new employees to try to better balance workload within the organization, as well as make progress on some of those gaps that the survey and the workshops identified. So there's still a lot of work to be done, as you can see in the action plan, and they require a sustained and concerted effort. I think, in my own work history, when you're trying to implement change within an organization, if you're asking already busy people to do the change, often the change that you look to achieve isn't achieved because nobody has the time. So you need to create capacity within an organization to allow them to make progress on certain fronts. So we're in early days in terms of we have new people within the organization who are helping us. We are getting traction on some things. We're trialing some things. And I think I would just ask that the board have an open mind as we come back and report to you on the successes or, quite frankly, the failures that we may encounter, and be open to whatever recommendations we might follow up with to achieve the desired outcomes.
Okay, thank you, Sally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Glenn. I have a speakers list forming. Next, I have Eli, followed by John Carew, and then followed by Phil Sweetman. Go ahead, Eli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Sally, I'm interested to know, would this report be going hand in hand with the next report about disconnecting from the workplace? Can you tell us a little bit about the connectivity between the two reports?
Sure. So the disconnecting from work is actually I don't even know whether it's technically a regulatory requirement, but the province changed its guidance documents to employers on implementing certain provisions under the Employment Standards Act. And they now require employers with more than 25 employees to implement a disconnect from work policy. And it addresses some of the issues that we have faced as an organization, where people feel at times they haven't been able to disconnect. And that adds to the workplace stress when they feel like at 7 p.m. at night, they're still having to, respond to emails or voice messages or whatever the case may be. So I think it goes hand in glove with what we're trying to achieve through our workplace stress action plan.
And if I can ask you, my other question is, so we have implementation plan on the front of us, and it's well dated, well defined for us, but I didn't see somewhere where do we have a policy in place to meet with like to have an exit meeting with staff in a senior position or in any position? Do we have that? Like, does you as a general manager, would you meet with the planner who's leaving us and have an exit meeting with them? That's my first question. And second question, when we talk about the training and this, how do we measure that success? Or when would you report back on the success of your, and that was too much question there.
Okay, so in terms of exit strategies, it varies because sometimes I would say that when people are leaving because there's family reasons, like they're moving cities, and then we've had some of that. I've just had general conversations with people. I wouldn't call it an exit interview per se, but to understand from them what they liked about the organization, what didn't work for them, et cetera. But I would say there's no policy around that, and I would have to acknowledge it's not consistent. It's not consistently done. So when people retired, for instance, it wasn't done in that first year when we had all those retirements. And about half of the people who left since then have literally relocated city for other very different jobs. So of those remaining, I would say informal conversations happened, and there's an opportunity for us to do more of that. In terms of measuring success and understanding what impact, if any, we're having with respect to training, I think that some of it will be in terms of me just understanding from employees if they're, because there is communication that happens formally and informally within the organization. So, as a general manager, I do have a sense of where there are issues within the organization because people come and talk to me or they talk to others, and it makes its way back to me so that I have an understanding of where there are issues. And so one way to benchmark that is just to get a sense of the mood of the organization and whether those kinds of queries and concerns are continuing, or if they decrease in volume, if things seem to be evolving. I would also just say the tenor in the office, quite frankly, in the past, 6 to 8 weeks, we actually hear laughter in the office in a manner that we haven't for, since before COVID. Now, part of that's because we have people returning to the workplace, but it's also because I think there's just, a different mood in the workplace today than there was 6 months ago. Doesn't mean we're out of the woods by any sense of imagination, but, people's demeanor accounts for a lot. Body language is 90% of our communication. And so when I see happy, engaged employees, that's a good indicator to me that we're having success. And then lastly, I would say that we do intend a year from now to have another engagement survey, employee survey. And the proof will be in the pudding. Either we see a difference in results or we don't in terms of employee sentiment and outlook.
I know it's not part of this report, Mr. Chair, but do we have sufficient funding for training and development? Because it's okay to ask the supervisor or the manager to seek that, but do we have funding to train those people to become eligible to know if something happened in the workplace, to be able to be part of this? Is there funding available for development and training to the supervisors to be able to do their job?
So we make use of a program called HR Downloads, and it does provide for, I'd say, a basic level of training in all those areas identified here. But if you were wanting to get into more workshop type training or training we might do in partnership with a management consultant, we do not have that kind of funding.
I know not in this report, but we might want to think about it at some point, because training supervisor in the end of the day maybe is a cost saving, if you ask me, with the large organization, to have someone know how to identify risk at workplace and manage that. So that could be a cost saving in a way, than wait till something happen and then anyway. So maybe it's not here, but I like what I see. I see that the timeline go hand in hand with your next report, which the next report is mandatory by May 30. So you only have 11 days to implement that policy. So, but I'm glad we're on both of those. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Eli. Those are some very good suggestions. Thank you. Next on the speakers list, I have John Carew.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I think the hand actually looks fairly smiley as well. So it is nice to hear that there's laughter back in the workplace, Sally. My question is similar to Glenn's, and I appreciate the question in terms of clarifying the board's responsibilities. And I like the additional response from your colleague, Christine. I guess I'd like to know a little more about some of the best management practices you might recommend to the board as we go through this transition. And as Sally has said, we have to remain adaptable. So it's also reasonable expectations from a board perspective as to, is it reasonable to think that everything would be resolved in a year's time? Which I don't think it would be. But I think if there were some other ways of being able to give us some guidance or perhaps some feedback as to other benchmarks to take into consideration as we work through this process, and certainly as we continue to have your good services to assist us in that, I think that would be beneficial. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Phil.
That was
Yes,
actually a
it is.
question, Mr. Chair. That was a question to
Sorry,
Christine.
sorry about
I thought that was a
John.
question. I was just trying
Yes,
to
yes,
unmute
it
myself.
was. Go ahead, Christine.
I'm actually going to, because Tegan is taken over as our team lead on specialized services, and this is as it commits into other parts. So Tegan, I'm not sure if you can chime in on some of that as well, but I think it definitely lots of great information with respect to how a board can work on that.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I was typing as the question was being asked. I'm not sure if I caught all of it, but my understanding was, how can we support you as an organization achieve your goals and objectives from a health through a health and safety lens? Is that sort of what I'm hearing? I see some nods from Glenn, so I'm assuming that that is correct. John, yes?
Yes, but I guess I'm wanting to drill down a little more too. It's not just the objectives of the organization, it's the objectives of a healthy workplace, more specifically, and really wanting the work plan to be successful. And if it needs some adjustment, fine. But this is something where learning by doing is one approach, but doing it with some additional advice as to expectations, things to look out for, some best practices, I think would be helpful.
So I think I had just put briefly in the chat, and I'm not sure if everyone in the boardroom can see the chat or not. So Sally says no. So sorry about that. But I just had suggested that one of the ways that the board can support the action plan moving forward is to track successful outcome measures. And part of the way we do that, I think Sally mentioned it, is looking at reassessing current organizational state within 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or however long we think that the action plan items are going to take to be effective across the organization. So that's one way, and there's different ways you can do that. Certainly you've started with stress assess, and so that's a good baseline measure. And so if we look at implementing that same organizational assessment, at various points in the future, then you can track progress that way. Another way that you can think about approaching this is to consider psychological health and safety from a program perspective. And that was one of the slides that Christine had shared was the components of a psychological health and safety program. And really the goal there is to take an approach to psychological health and safety that ties into your overall health and safety management system and the components of a health and safety program, and to tie it all in together so that it's not something additional to do or to achieve, but it takes the things that you already have in place, because you do already have a fair number of things in place, which is phenomenal, and build on those. So So really assessing what your gaps are in the organization when it comes to program components, and making sure your action plan items tie into your areas of need or your areas of opportunity within that program, taking that program approach. And then you can think about assessing and reassessing your program approach year after year as well, to sort of take a more consistent approach to program element and program design. And that's where we can help and support and provide resources to be able to meet that program approach, because we are a health and safety association, and that's typically the approach that we would take to support organizations.
So eloquently said, Tegan, thanks.
Did that give you the answer you were looking for, John?
I just wanted to say, yes, it did. I think being able to really give us some additional guidance on resources that are available for things like a program approach would benefit us all. Thank you.
So what I'll do, sorry, just to chime in one more time, I will, I can send Sally our program guide for psychological health and safety. And what it has in it is a table of resources at the end of various existing resources that you can use to meet your need where you've identified gaps.
Thanks, Tegan. Okay, Phil, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to observe that, as Sally has said, I think there is a slight lightening up of people's feelings of well-being in the community. And like you, we've noticed some jovialness within our very small staff. I hope that through best practices and so on, it's good to keep track of what the challenges are. But in my own company, I face some very small challenges. As I look at the list of things that Sally needs to do to satisfy the province and so on, I hope in trying to keep the employee stress level down, you don't burn out. So try and convey to staff the big load that you have to try to meet those provincial requirements. They are onerous, and convey that along. And I found in my own company, when you lay out to people and say, look, we got to get this done. I know it's not a good, it's not easy, but help me get through this, that people have been cooperative and try to understand where I come from. And I guess I would pass that same thing along to you. Don't burn yourself out, get enough help to do the job. And I'm pleased to see you've got some people who are assessing what others have done, and happy to do that. Thank you. Don't burn out. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I don't see any other hands up. Oh, John Inglis, go ahead.
I just want to make a short comment. Phil, you reminded me, I'd like to say that one of the 10 items was to have look like all senior staff attend 4 training sessions. Attending 4 training sessions can increase time pressure on staff. So personally, I would advise that you just consider that pretty carefully.
Thank you, John. And that's a good point with the training. It actually came up at the Finance and Administration Advisory Committee on that point. A lot of the training is online training, but I can tell you from my own workplace experience, we're just coming back into the office space as well. And we have a 2-year backlog on just basic health and safety training that all of my work colleagues have to catch up with, among many other things. So this is a moving target implementing this plan. The organization doesn't stop to catch its breath. It slows its pace down and has to work this through. So pacing is going to be very important in the implementation of this plan as people redevelop their workplace muscles and get back into their old or their new adapted routine as we get back into the workplace. Looking at that, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Tegan, for your presentation and your participation. We're going to move on to the main motion. The main motion in front of you is a bit of a composite. Items A, B, and C went to the Finance Administration Committee, and items D and E were amendments proposed by the Finance and Administration Committee to deal specifically with the question of vertical trust in the organization. It was felt that the Joint Health and Safety Committee needed to have its voice heard, and that the board needed to hear, be more aware of what that committee is working on, and any recommendations that come from the committee. So there's a little more of a direct conduit between the workers in the office and the board level itself. So resolved that the Finance and Administration Committee recommend that the board A, approve the action plan for reducing and mitigating workplace stressors. B, direct the general manager to provide a status update in October with any potential budget implications for 2023. And C, direct that the stress assess survey be carried out in spring 2023 to reevaluate workplace psychosocial health. D, receive quarterly minutes of the Joint Health and Safety Committee as part of the general manager's update. And E, receive an annual report from the Joint Health and Safety Committee in spring 2023, concurrent to receiving the second psychosocial survey results. Can I have a mover for this motion, please? Moved by Eli, seconded by Janet. Is there any further discussion on this? Just raise your hands. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Christine and Tegan.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda, we've already alluded to, that's the employee manual amendment for a new disconnect from work policy. Sally, have you already done your presentation on this? Well, we'll quickly go through it.
Presentation. So you can see there the definition. This is right out of the documents from the province. And as I mentioned, okay.
We'll take a little recess. I think we lost our,
That's odd.
we left the Zoom meeting, or did it close?
Yes, please. But did we lose all our members? They're all there? Okay.
Folks, if you can still see us, the screen is just telling us that we've kicked you all out of the meeting.
No,
We're
don't
trying to,
cancel.
We're trying to get this fixed.
Okay, sorry. Let's try this again. So I mentioned the drivers and so the main thrust of the documentation from the province is that it's not that people are no longer have no obligations to work outside of normal working hours. What they're looking for is that the terms and conditions under which somebody might be required to work outside of office hours are clearly defined so that expectations are understood between employer and employee. That's what they're looking for from the corporate policy. So the policy you have before you, it defines disconnection from work. One of the key elements is it makes the distinction between normal office hours and work schedule, because different people in this building have different work schedules. But the reality is I can't prevent people from contacting you during normal office hours, and there is business that can only occur during normal office hours. So what this policy says, though you might have a particular work schedule, you should expect that you may receive and may, correspondence during normal office hours, and that you may be required to attend a meeting during normal office hours. But if you are contacted outside your work schedule, that, the 5 points there highlight to you what the purpose of contacting you would normally be. And the first 4 are pretty straightforward. It's the last one where we're going to have to, look at reasonableness, but it says where business and operational reasons require contact outside of the employee's normal working hours. And so this is where we would be looking to, as best as possible, not contact you during outside of your work schedule unless there's real business or operational need to do so. And if we're doing so for whatever reason, that if we expect you to act on it, we need to, define those as urgent. So it's very clear to you whenever you're receiving either the email or the voice message, that you understand the expectation from the employer about how you're to handle this, because otherwise the expectation is that you do not have to. And therefore, unless something's marked urgent, you do not even have to read it, so that people can have better work-life balance. And then lastly, the policy identifies a means for raising concerns if you feel that the policy is not being implemented fairly.
Thanks, Sally. Any questions for Sally about this report or why it's before us? Looking for hands in the room. I don't see hands on the screen. Okay, we'll move to the main motion. Resolve that the Board of Directors, A, approve the disengaging from work policy contained herein. B, direct staff to amend section 2.3 hours of work of the employee manual and add new section 2.3.3 disconnecting from work. And C, direct that all employees receive a copy of the new policy within 30 days of approval. Could I have a mover for this, please? Moved by Fay, seconded by Roxanne. Any further comment? I think if Sally sends you an email on Sunday afternoon and it isn't marked urgent, no need to reply. I know, I'd wonder why she'd send it to me on a Sunday afternoon. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Next item, there's a very thick section of the agenda, is the administrative bylaw amendments report. Whoops, sorry. I think I have something twice. Go ahead, Sally.
Okay, so these bylaw amendments are largely geared around implementing the direction I received at the previous meeting regarding committee structures. So it restructures Appendix 4 so it's easier to understand, and it very clearly defines the different governance roles that our different committees have, because that was a significant concern raised by board members, is that in particular that it was understood that public advisory committees have essentially no governance role. And then going down that track, the regulations committee actually does have a delegated authority from this committee. So the preamble of Appendix 4 really sets out the differing makeup and governing roles of each of the committees. Then it also implements changes to allow the executive committee to operate outside of an emergency. And so while I amended Appendix 4, I had to go back into the main document to make some other changes there. It clarified the roles and responsibilities amongst the committees per the discussions we had. I also, as I was reviewing Appendix 4, I noticed that the museum mandate didn't include the James Naismith collection, so I put that in while I was at it. And then I also noticed that it had what are soon to become redundant regulations appended at the end of the document, and there's no need to append regulatory documents. So that in a nutshell are the amendments before you.
Thank you, Sally. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about the report and the document? Go ahead, Eli.
So Sally, is this changes to will be captured also in the case of the pandemic, like how the bylaw would work, whether you be attend in person or virtual or both? Or
So the board had actually approved anything you see in gray are the amendments we made earlier on in the pandemic or otherwise to allow for us to meet remotely, et cetera. And then when we are coming out of the pandemic, we amended them again to allow us to meet as we are today, either hybrid or electronically. So anything you see are gray should capture those previous decisions of the board in terms of how we meet, whether in a pandemic or not. Same with the voting, because previously you weren't allowed to vote remotely, et cetera. So all those changes have already been taken care of.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the main motion. Resolved that the policy and resolved that the Board of Directors approve the amendment of the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority's administrative bylaw as set out in attachment 1. And B, recruitment of members to the, am I doing B as well? And recruitment of members to the new Mississippi Watershed Public Advisory Committee. Could I have somebody move that, please? Moved by Chuck, seconded by Glenn. Any further comments or concerns? All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, folks. The next item on the agenda, number 7, is per diems and honoraria report. Go ahead, Sally.
So I had received previous direction from the board to look into what our per diems and honorarium are paid at other organizations. And you can see in the package the spreadsheet that shows how ours compared to other organizations. And the bottom line is for those organizations that do pay honorariums, we're very much, at the same rates, just slightly below the average. And similarly for our per diem. So for all the reasons outlined in the report in terms of the recruitment and retention of board members and to ensure their member participation at meetings like this, I do recommend that we continue to provide both per diems and honorariums, and that it is always within, an individual's discretion if they want to decline to receive the per diem or the honorarium.
We do have a city policy tell us as an elected official, we cannot receive. So it's not an option whether we want or not. So just want to be clear, but I don't have to declare conflict of interest on this one, but, right? Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Is there any reason that this is the only CA with odd numbers rather than increments of $5 for its awards?
Hold on.
So we inflate it using the cost of living. So
It's just a little easier to think about if it's $75 rather than $73.12.
Are you looking to round them up or round them down?
I don't have a recommendation, but I would recommend rounding it in some direction.
Any other questions or comments about the report? Okay, our main motion is resolved that the board continue to pay per diem, or that the MVCA continue to pay per diems to all board members and an honorarium to the chair. Could I have a mover for that, please? Moved by Eli, seconded by Fay. All in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? Motion is carried. 2 opposed? Sorry, could I just get that again? Any all opposed, raise your hands again, not to single you out. We have 2 opposed. Thank you very much. Motion is carried. We're on item number 8 in the agenda, the appointment of a new regulations official. Go ahead, Sally.
So Tatiana, do you want to stand up and just wave for those of us in the room? Tatiana joined us last year as a regulations into our regulations group, and she's completed 2 weeks of fairly onerous training. And we're now in a position for the board to appoint her to assume official authorities as are delegated or provided to us under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act. And this would include being able to investigate potential violations and writing notices of violation and all other sundry actions associated with regulatory compliance and enforcement. So we're looking to officially appoint her to perform this role.
Thank you, Sally. And I have the motion is that the Board of Directors appoint Tatiana Vukovic to enforce Ontario Regulation 15306 and Ontario Regulation 12090 of the Conservation Authorities Act. Could I have a mover for this, please? Moved by Paul, Seconded by, I'm going to look at my Zoom screen to see if I can get a second. Andrew Tennant. All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Congratulations, Titania. Next, we have a staff presentations on compliance management update. We have Andy Moore and our new official, Titania Vukovic, making the presentation. I'm going to invite them to come to the front of the room and take my chair to do this. My mess out of your way. Thank you.
So if you can share this, just have to put in presentation mode, I think, Tatiana.
Sorry.
Just have to go back one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So for those of the board that have met me before, my name is Andy Moore, Regulations Officer at the Conservation Authority. I've been here for about 15 years now, and you've just all met Tatiana, who is freshly appointed, so she's getting thrown into the fire right away. Excuse me, next slide. So we were going to, we haven't done an update to the board for a while, mainly, pandemic restrictions and all sorts of things. So we're going to just provide an update on our regulations program from the past couple of years. So first off, just an overview to the board as to where we get our regulatory authority from. So Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act allows for conservation authorities to make regulations that prohibit or restrict development in natural hazards, as well as natural heritage features, but then also prohibits or restricts the alteration to watercourses and wetlands. So our specific regulation 15306, and I should note that it is permissive legislation, and I'll explain that a little further in this slide. So the two key sections that we have in our reg is Section 2 and Section 5. So Section 2 indicates that no person shall undertake development, and development is italicized because it includes a wide array of activities, everything from constructing a structure, or erecting a building, adding an addition onto a structure, but then also includes fill removal, fill placement, and site grading. So the prohibition of the regulation in Section 2, prohibits development within floodplains, unstable slopes, erosion hazards, wetlands, and then lands adjacent to wetlands. And Section 5 provides for the prohibition on straightening, changing, diverting, or interfering in any way with a river, creek, stream, or watercourse, and changing or interfering in any way with the wetland. However, going back to being a permissive legislation, Sections 3 and 6 essentially say you can undertake those activities in those areas if you have obtained a permit from the Conservation Authority. So for the purpose of this presentation, and to just keep it clear, we're going to split it into two sections. There's violations, which are activities or individuals that have failed to obtain a permit from the Conservation Authority within the areas we've just discussed. And then there's non-compliance, which refers to compliance with the terms and conditions of a permit that the Conservation Authority has indeed issued. So with that, I'll actually turn it over to Tatiana for the permit compliance section.
All right, so this slide depicts statistics on permits and compliance inspections for the years of 2019 and 2020. We felt it was important to include this information as we were unable to report to you last year. Also, for additional context to indicate trends across the watershed, we have broken the sum totals down by municipalities. So during 2019 and 2020, the MVCA received 549 permit applications, 488 of which were approved. And during those years, 246 compliance inspections were conducted. Those inspections also include permits that were issued prior to 2019. We also had one hearing of the Regulations Committee for a permit in Beckwith in 2019. Now here you'll see the permit compliance statistics for 2021. We've provided it in the same format for ease, and again, it is broken down by municipality to show those trends. In 2021, the MVCA received 297 permit applications, 283 of which were approved. In 2021, 54 compliance inspections were conducted. And there was one hearing by the Regulations Committee for the Ottawa area in the ward of Goulburn. So this graph provides a visual representation of the numbers I've just been speaking to. So spanning from 2019 to 2021 on the right, it shows the permits that are issued or were issued and compliance inspections conducted, and which of those compliance inspections resulted in a compliant status or a non-compliant status, and then which of those non-compliant statuses were resolved. You'll notice a significant amount of permits have been issued each year, with 2019 and 2021 hitting record highs. You'll also notice a downward trend in compliance inspections conducted each year. This is due to a number of factors. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic affected all of our work processes, and unfortunately, inspections cannot be conducted from home. So the multiple shutdowns and shifting protocols occurring since the beginning of 2020 have had major implications on inspections over the last number of years. The next factor is that there has been a large increase in complaints and violations, and in particular, during the years of 2020 and 2021. Andy will get into the details of those numbers a bit later, but in speaking to compliance impact, all complaints and violations are inspected. And then once those violations are confirmed, investigating the violation, compiling cases, and then working towards a resolution with property owners as well as other regulatory agencies takes a lot of time and resources. And violations are given higher priority than, say, like a routine compliance inspection. Next, as alluded to before, there have been a record number of approvals, with 771 permits being issued since 2019. Additionally, those permits are valid for 24 months, which results in annual overflows, as well as some complexity in scheduling, as not every owner begins their work on their permit right when they've received their permit. Finally, during 2021, our compliance team has experienced staffing turnover, which resulted in time periods of less staff and also time periods that were dedicated towards onboarding and training. So part of responding to these inspection requirements is being addressed by our compliance strategy. A major component of our compliance strategy has been to develop a prioritization ranking of permits. These priority ranks were developed based on regulated feature type, development type, size and scale of development, estimated impacts, compliance history, etc. We assign this ranking to issued permits and then use it as a guide to our compliance management. This slide is depicting the basics of those priority ranks. So for beginning from the highest priority, inspections focus on residential development within floodplains, fill placement, cut and fills within floodplains, development or interference within wetlands, major municipal residential infrastructure projects, erosion control works, and shoreline alterations. As I mentioned before, all complaints that are received are inspected, and this includes complaints that apply to a property that has a valid permit. So even if I was to go out and inspect a property or a permit and find it to be in compliance, if I was then to receive a complaint after the fact, I need to go back out and re-inspect that permit and see whether it's still in a compliant status, or, oh, nope, this is a non-compliance matter, and now I have to work with the owner to make sure that remedial actions have been taken, or actually these works have nothing to do with the permit that was issued, and now we're dealing with a violation and we have to work towards a resolution. So common trends that we see in non-compliance are excess fill placement within floodplains, non-conformity with approved grading plans, expansion of development beyond the scope of what was approved, and issues relating to erosion and sediment control measures, which usually means poor installation or many times no installation at all. And Andy will delve a little further into this.
Thank you, Tatiana. So just an example of a non-compliance matter with a permit that was issued by the authority. These individuals obtained a permit to construct a dwelling on the lot. I will note that the developer had purchased the lot and was building the home and then sold it to the next landowner. So the developer obtained the permit. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a blue shaded area with a black hatching. That was the wetland boundary that was delineated by a consultant, and our permit was issued to direct development outside of that wetland area. It's hard for folks to see, but the southerlymost corner of that dwelling had a setback of about 1 to 2 meters. And there was, as per conditions of the permit, to be no expansion into that wetland area. Compliance inspection conducted in 2019 determined that they had filled quite a bit more than what was approved on the permit. So the permit was in non-compliance because they failed to one, abide by the drawings and schedules that were approved as a permit, but then also with the conditions. So through cooperative works with the developer and the new homeowner, we were able to remove all of the fill, or most all of the fill, from the wetland area. The landowners had to install the retaining wall you see there to meet building code requirements for fill apron around the foundation. And then they actually remediated the area to the left of the retaining wall with wetland plantings and seeding. So onto the violations. So again, these are the cases or the instances that we receive where there has not been a permit issued by the authority within a regulated area. Even in those cases, our main objective is to bring those individuals, whether they be landowners, contractors, developers, whomever, is to bring them into compliance. And in 2020 through to today, we currently have dealt with 80 violations, which are those ones that have required further effort of enforcement staff to resolve. So by sending notices of violation and undertaking remedial actions or restorative measures to actually bring the property or issue into compliance. And we've also received 162 complaints. So complaints we've categorized as individuals phoning the Conservation Authority about something they've seen, but we've determined that there's no regulatory infraction, if you will, and there's no need for the Conservation Authority to take that matter any further. Currently, right now, there is one charge before the courts. I'll get into that in a couple of slides quickly. We are expecting a guilty plea and remedial work to be done, and we're still working with the landowner on that. And we do have one case from a non-compliance with a permit, actually, from Bayview Drive that was in 2019. It's still before the courts because of COVID, the pandemic shutting down the court system. We are still awaiting court dates for that. Next slide. And this just gives a further visual representation of the number of complaints and or violations we've received over the past 2 years. These are both record numbers for us to be dealing with over the past 2 years. So in total, we received 70 complaints in 2020. 29 of those required further action. And last year, we received 72 complaints or notices of occurrences, and 46 of those required actual enforcement or compliance action to resolve the matter. So this is the property or the violations that are before the court system right now. So the property is located in the city of Ottawa. The landowner is, how do I put it? A frequent flyer. You can see on the screen, there's a long access or laneway, sorry, that extends through what is the floodplain of Cody Creek. And there's also wetlands unevaluated, which are delineated by just the green line. And then you also have provincially significant wetland. The landowner obtained a permit from the authority in 2004 to put the access laneway through the floodplain. But as conditions of that permit, they were to excavate the 2 ponds that are on the north of the driveway to satisfy cut and fill requirements. In 2006, the landowner was actually charged for an alteration to a watercourse. So that one was, there was a guilty plea or resolution there, and there was further violations in 2011. Fast forward to 2019, there's 3 key points on the property that I'll get into in the next slide to explain the violations further. So number 1 is one of those ponds that was required to be dug to alleviate flooding concerns with the construction of the driveway was filled in, therefore having an impact on floodplain storage. Secondly, there's the second point, the clear span bridge that was actually part of the charges in 2006 actually collapsed due to the heavy trucks hauling fill over it into the property. So they, the landowners installed culverts and backfilled them within the channel of Cody Creek. And then thirdly, they built an entirely new roadway through the wetlands and floodplain. All of this was without any permission from the Conservation Authority. Regulations of non-PSW features or unevaluated wetlands. Matt actually ducked out at the right time because he was wanting us to put this slide in. So in 2017, the Conservation Authority passed the motion or the policy to apply our regulations to all wetlands over ½ hectare in size. So we're going to give a bit of an update on where that's at from an enforcement perspective. That's good. So over the last 5 years, we've looked into 47 violations that have involved non-provincially significant wetlands. And roughly that number is equal between the city of Ottawa and then spread out across the balance of the jurisdiction, just to give an idea as to where these regulatory pressures are. And last year, we saw our highest number of wetland infractions with 18 non-PSW violations and 6 that were within provincially significant wetlands. And lastly, just we're gonna, Tatiana and myself will give an overview of something we're dealing with right now, which is interesting. This is another frequent flyer. The individual and the same contractor were charged by the Conservation Authority in 2015 on a property about 400 meters from the very bottom of this slide for unauthorized development and alteration, or unauthorized interference, sorry, within a provincially significant wetland. Property A that you can see highlighted, you can see there is some development at the easterly portion of the property that was located outside of the regulated area. That was there for some time. The individual landowner and the same contractor then expanded that topsoil screening operation through what is part of the locally significant Stitt wetland complex. So this came to us in November of last year, and I began the investigation into it. Shortly before that, property B, which is about 50 meters from property A, was charged under the Endangered Species Act by the MECP for destruction of Blanding's turtle habitat. Through our investigation, which I'll turn over to Tatiana in 2 seconds, we determined that this landowner is connected to that property B. That property B was convicted of under the Endangered Species Act and received about almost $500,000 in fine and restoration requirements. And the key indicator, the key point of this is that any confirmed endangered species habitat within 2 kilometers, or sorry, any land within 2 kilometers of a confirmed endangered species is protected under the ESA. So now we've got a complexity of multiple legislations and prior compliance. And now over to Tatiana.
You'll notice down at the bottom, it's kind of hidden, and I'm sorry if the coloring is hard to see, but there's property C as well. This is a rather new violation, but it is by the same owner. and it is also regulated as wetland. And basically, we discovered that the entire property had been stripped and graded over, and stockpiling was occurring. So again, dealing with a violation in terms of unauthorized development and interference with wetlands. So as Andy was mentioning, we're in the process of continuing our investigation and compiling information for our case. And
No, so property B was Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks under Endangered Species Act. But the key to these, both property A and property C, is that they are within 2 kilometers of that confirmed Blanding's turtle habitat on property B. Oh, sorry, Faye, it's right down in the very bottom left-hand corner, right here. Yeah, thanks, Sally. So the Conservation Authority is pursuing it, but we've also bumped both of these occurrences up to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks under the Endangered Species Act. And we have one more slide. Is that okay? So just lastly, just some of the challenges, just to kind of highlight it over the last 3 years. Goulburn wetlands, the provincially significant complex still poses a number of issues from regulatory perspective, and then wetlands in and around Canada and Carleton Place. The previous cases are just north of Canada. Our interagency relationships and investigations, while it's brightened in some regards, it's dimmed in others. John Curl will be happy to hear this, but the Department of Fisheries and Oceans have made us very strong rebound from the Harper days when the Fisheries Act was changed, and they are taking a very upfront approach to compliance. And we've actually dealt with them 3 times now in the past year, and they've taken over files and been the lead. So that's very good. Provincially, it's not as nice. It's taken a sharp turn downwards, but that's the political climate we're in. Currently, right now, we're looking at potentially 5 charges forthcoming that we will be pursuing under the CA Act, mainly for egregious offenses like the ones we've talked about on the previous slide. And there's some other compliance history cases. And then again, as everything is impacted the Conservation Authority is any anticipated changes to the Act and the regulations. So, and that is our presentation.
I guess my question was, you respond to complaints generally. So you're not in the habit of going around looking for violations. In other words, by the time you get there, the damage is generally done.
Yeah, that's correct. We don't go looking for work. We've got enough as it is. Unfortunately, though, or actually, fortunately, I mean, the public is our eyes and ears and boots on the ground. They do contact us about complaints. Most times damage is already done, but sometimes we get there in time. But then there's also, if we're going out to do something and we're driving back to the office and we see it ourselves, then we also come across violations or offenses that way.
I'll also say sometimes you'll be looking at aerial imagery for a different property and you'll notice something on a property that you know is regulated, and then it'll prompt you to sort of look into further. But again, that would be post work.
Yes.
Quick question, if I may. Probably everybody knows the answer to it. Sorry about that, but when you go to court, do you have a legal department here, or do you have to hire a lawyer to go to court, or is it just you guys? And is there a budget for that, or is that just as it happens?
Yeah, there is a budget for legal fees. We have a private Sally? Yes, private consultant or counsel that does do our litigation work, but we end up doing most of the grunt work as collecting the evidence, preparing the Crown briefs, all of the documents that need to go to the court as part of disclosure, that falls back to us.
And the next part of that, if the Conservation Authority wins, is, are you awarded costs? Or has that ever happened?
The only time we're actually receiving costs is if the matter is appealed. So if we receive a conviction for an offense and there's a monetary penalty, that money stays with the court. If the convicted party files an appeal to the higher court and the conviction is still upheld upon appeal, we can be awarded costs, which we have been successful in receiving before.
Thanks.
So I see John Curro.
So Andy, always good to hear that my old colleagues at Fisheries and Oceans are stepping up to the plate again. And welcome on board, Jana. My question is really more of an overview as do you see the trends in terms of compliance shifting? And it's actually nice from my observation from what you presented that you know, most of the compliance is resolvable through negotiations with property owners. But are we seeing a shift because more and more development is, case in point, on marginal lands?
I would say we're seeing a shift overall just due to sheer volume of the complaints and violations we're receiving, say prior to 5 years ago. There is a shift in better compliance for sure amongst the water or across the watershed, but we're still having that old saying of we're spending 90% of our time on 10% of the individuals. So it seems to be it's a lot of the recurring parties that we're dealing with, and for the most part there's just no, you can't stop that trend, I guess is how I can say it. You can't turn that curve around. Some of the bigger cases we have had with larger organizations and companies, I would say that as they have turned a complete 180, which is very good to see, and we're working with them a lot better. But we had to go that route of laying a charge and taking it before the court essentially. But all in all, I would say compliance is improving, but it's still just with the sheer volume of workload with permits being issued and urban expansion, it's a work in progress every day.
Thanks, and keep up the good work, please.
Thank you. Glenn?
Yeah, thank you to both of you for the important work you're doing. I wanted to ask about what kind of notification, formally or informally, is there to municipalities when there's a violation of any sort in their particular municipality?
It comes down to the nature of the violation. A lot of times, if it's a building issue, the municipality's building department is brought in and the building officials. If it's a public works or roads issue that department's brought in. Individual property violations, we don't necessarily notify a municipality of that if we don't feel there's any municipal issues, whether it be Planning Act or Building Code Act. So it kind of depends on the nature of the offense.
Yeah, I know from time to time there are press releases that go out either through MBCA or sometimes through the province. But your last example is interesting. It's between my ward and Eli El-Shantiri's ward. I wasn't aware specifically of the outcome, but I think that kind of thing would be of considerable interest to the public to make them aware of the enforcement and the serious consequences that there are when there's a finding of wrongdoing. So could be something to explore in the future about publicity, positive publicity that could be an outcome both for deterring future violations, but also just to make the public aware that there is oversight and there is enforcement that's happening. Thank you, though, for your presentation.
Phil.
Yes, I was pleased to note that you had something like a 95% approval rating for the of the permits that you had applied. So I think that's good. And in connection with what Steve has said about legal costs, I'm pleased to see that 50 out of 80 charges your work have been resolved, and the other 30, I guess, means you're working on. And then I think there's a small portion you're going to have to go the legal route. And I just want to comment that as much as you can, you negotiating to get the kind of restoration that you did on the house that had gone into the wetland is probably far more productive than courts are an expensive way to get your justice. And just in that connection, it reminds me that a few years ago in the Goulburn wetland area, there was a case where there was to be restoration. Has there been any restoration? You had to appeal it, and you did get a ruling that said they were supposed to restore. Have we been able to get them to do any restoration?
Yes, so the restoration has been completed. There was that took a long time to get it done, and there was appeals and contempt of court motions and such. The party took the case all the way to the Court of Appeal in Toronto, but the wetland has been restored, and we've been documenting its progress, and we'll say that it is actually coming back very nicely. So that was definitely a big win for the CA. Not that we're keeping track of wins and losses, but in my view, we upheld like our mandate by restoring wetlands that were lost.
Well,
So
I think
our
that
goal.
was an important step, and it also might be something worth mentioning. You know, yeah, there's always a difficulty of you will get more by negotiation, but saying, look, at the end of the day, we do have the hammer that if you're not going to do what we ask, we can ask for restoration, and it will be costly. So that might stop further degradation of wetlands, as John was mentioning. You know, sometimes if people continue to do it because they don't think it's serious, you could mention that case where you were successful in getting the restoration.
And I hate to say it, but the offender A, B, and C on that slide is the same offender from that case, Phil. So just so people are aware, but again, 90% of the time is with 10% of the population. So, but.
What is the difference? When does it come before the regulatory committee? Like, does it come here first and then go to the court, or does it just go straight to the courts?
Yeah, good question, Faye. So, and that's one point we could have clarified a little better is regulations committee is a committee of the board, and their hearings are being held of permit applications that have been submitted that staff can't approve at a staff level. So it has to be decided on by the regulations committee. So it's totally separate from the violations. Okay. Perfect.
Thanks, Andy and Tatiana, for your presentation. The next item on your agenda is the Conservation Ontario Annual Report and a brief update. You've got a copy of the annual report included in your board package. And I just had a couple of things that I wanted to note from the recent Conservation Ontario annual general meeting. After a 2-year term, the chair of Conservation Ontario decided not to seek re-election. It had largely to do with his inability to remain as the chair of his own conservation authority. The new 2-year limit sort of cut him off at the knees, which is unfortunate because Andy Mitchell was proven to be a highly effective chair for Conservation Ontario. As I don't know if many of you recognize the name, but he was a former Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs and Minister of Agriculture federally. And having him come to the leadership of Conservation Ontario really made a difference in terms of the organization's ability to maneuver at the cabinet level and at the lobby level, particularly with respect to the volume of regulatory change that's been happening over the past couple of years. But Andy stepped aside, and Alan Revel from our neighboring Cataraqui conservation area has stepped into the chairman's role. The annual general meeting itself was pretty standard for an annual general meeting. There were a number of things that came up. There were concerns being raised, particularly about the next round of regulatory change that came in through, the Build Better Housing, the new act that was passed by the provincial government with respect to increasingly tighter timelines for regulatory approval. And in fact, the new act's suggestion, whenever the regulatory regulations come through from that, is the suggestion that if the timelines for approving development proposals aren't met, the development fees can actually be refunded as a penalty. So there was great concern with respect to that, and the pressure that puts on not only municipalities but also conservation authorities, because in the event that a permit is delayed at one level or the other, the municipality would lose its development permit fees in terms of a refund. It was something that was suggested in that act. Also, the Conservation Authority provided a number of updates with respect to its work on helping conservation authorities like ours comply with the regulatory change in terms of meeting deadlines for permit approvals and the changes for accountability and transparency. Our Conservation Authority was actually ahead of the curve on a lot of those moves. So we were in a good position as these regulations came in. But Conservation Ontario has been providing a great deal of advice to us and other conservation authorities, assisting with compliance and keeping up and learning best practices from each other. There's a great deal of work that has been ongoing in terms of building relationships with Indigenous communities, not only along the lines of reconciliation, but simply in terms of working together over shared lands and partnering with information in terms of the work that conservation authorities do, and bringing those lands into the fold, so to speak, but working in partnership with a number of bands across the province to increase the scope of significant lands, and also just to develop a working relationship. There was an update on the Lortel Conservation Symposium, which this year will be, I believe, virtual one more time, but they are working to get that symposium back up and running in a real-time, face-to-face format for 2023 for sure. Other than that, it was just pretty much an annual general meeting, but it's Conservation Ontario has been delivering great value to its member conservation authorities for the past couple of years. As I've been attending those meetings, I can see that without Conservation Ontario, a lot of conservation authorities would have been very much adrift with respect to the regulatory change that's been going on, and the difference that body, that collective, has made a difference in terms of changing the shape and the way that the new regulations of land have hit the ground has been quite important and quite a valuable organization. So that concludes my verbal report. I invite you to read the annual report in your board package. Any questions? Phil?
Yes, I'm pleased to hear the good work Conservation Ontario is doing, and generally I think it's well received, and it looked pretty organized what they were presenting. And I think my recollection is you went to that meeting the day that we had a finance and administration meeting. And I guess I would just ask, staff have usually been good about trying to hold meetings when counselors are available. Could they put on the agenda when is the chair and the vice chair available, especially if they're off at a wedding? Well, that's their preference. But when they're doing work on behalf of the Conservation Authority, it seems to me it would be appropriate that we put a little bit of weight towards saying, Mr. Chairman, you should attend, but also we'd like you to attend the meetings here as well. Thank you.
Noted.
That wasn't supposed to be
Oh, no, I hear.
whipping you as the chair, just saying to staff another thing to take into consideration,
No, I hear
not
that.
just the votes, how many do you get on a certain day? Thank you.
Yeah, I know that day we were pretty bunched up with obligations. Any other questions? Next, we'll move on to the budget control report. Oh, sorry, John. Hello.
Hello, Chair. My question is perhaps a little different, and that's sometimes with Conservation Ontario or just anything Ontario does, Eastern Ontario kind of gets left out of the discussion in terms of priority setting. So I was interested to know as to whether or not Eastern Ontario conservation authorities are continuing to, in fact, caucus amongst themselves to ensure that there's an adequate and reasonable profile for our issues being part of a larger agenda.
Well, we have a chair. The new chair is from Eastern Ontario, from Cataraqui, which is certainly going to be helpful. And when we met in person at Conservation Ontario, we did meet together. The Eastern Ontario Conservation Authorities would usually dine together to discuss what was happening at the meetings. And but since COVID times, it's been difficult to do that. We've been sort of atomized as individual delegates. We log in, we watch, and then we zoom away after the meeting. And that's something that would be worthwhile getting back to with the future meetings as Conservation Ontario moves back to an in-person meeting structure.
I could add to that, John, that despite COVID, business continues, and as committees are structured within Conservation Ontario, Eastern Ontario Caucus of General Managers, we meet every other week, and we select from amongst us who will sit on those committees to make sure that there's representation from Eastern Ontario. And so, for instance, Summer from our VCA was key member at the table for all the discussions that happened with the province, having to do with the design and implementation of the various regulations that recently came into effect.
Thanks, Sally. Any other questions before we move on? Next, we have the budget control report with a report from Angela Miller. Hey, Angela.
So we'll just switch chairs, I guess. That one. Yeah, thanks. All right, so the first quarter report is actually up until April 30th, just because of the timing of the year and how long it took me to get this to you. So we're actually looking at the first part of the year until April 30th. We're tracking quite normally. A little low on the expenditures at this point, but I'm sure that they'll come along as things get busier, so we'll get caught up on those. But the one highlight is that our planning and regulations revenues are quite high, much significant increase over 2021, the same period of time. So a lot of that is due to the fact that many planning applications or reviews were initiated in 2021, but actually completed in the first quarter this year. And the revenues are associated in this fiscal quarter. As well, Matt wanted me to mention that almost the same number of permit applications were received over the same period from 2022 and the same period in 2021. But there has been a decrease in routine type of permits, like for shoreline stabilization or septic replacement. Now our trend seems to be for more of an increase in permit and planning applications that are more complex. So larger residential and commercial developments. So those fees are higher for those type of reviews, and that is why that's also contributing to the higher revenues right now, along with the sheer volume that's coming in daily. So at this point, we still have not heard from the province whether or not we're going to receive the same amount of our provincial transfer of 128,000. So I believe we should know that imminently. So we haven't heard that it won't be the same amount of allocation, but it also has not been indexed to come up with the cost of living or any changes of such. So that's always a concern that it's not indexed. So as of the rating of this report, we had received the annual renewal documents, and I almost fell off my chair, so did Sally, because our renewal documents showed a huge increase of like 54% increase in our insurance premiums over what we were expecting, and what was budgeted. So the rationale, we've met with Glenn Shepherd from Marsh Canada, and he has given us the rationale since this report went into the agenda. Apparently last year, we were to receive a 23% increase, and we did not receive that. We received a typical 3% increase due to our changes in our volumes and whatnot. So this year, we're experiencing the increase we should have had last year. They're not going to go back in time and charge us for last year, but it would have been a staggered increase for us. It would have been 23% last year and 31% this year. So unfortunately, our insurance is going to be higher than our 2021 insurance by $50-some thousand. So in our next report, the next budget control, hopefully we'll have some operational savings somewhere along the way to offset that increased cost. If not, the next control report, we may be asking for a motion to pull the additional funds from the operating reserve if by the end of the year we need to cover those additional costs that are not considered in the budget. So hopefully we'll have some savings that we can offset that with. And there's no other items to note at this time, at this point.
Thanks, Ange. Any questions for Ange? In that report? Good news and bad news?
What was the number you said about the insurance increase? Increased by how much?
It's up by 54% or $57,000. Yeah, it's more.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm. Not all COVID recoveries are a good thing. Sally, we have your general manager's update.
Well, he snuck out of the room, but I wanted to share with you that longtime employee Ross Ferguson is retiring. It was supposed to be the end of this month, but we were holding on to him for a bit longer for into mid-June, and he will probably stick around on a more part-time basis to the end of July as part of the transition plan in terms of getting somebody on to replace him. But he did sneak away, didn't he, Alex? Anyway. So I did want to just acknowledge that he's been a tremendous resource to the organization for all these years, and we'll miss him terribly. Just looking at the GM update, the new regulations, they're highly technical. And until I think we get to the point where we're negotiating these agreements and trying to actually implement what's in the regulation, when I'm reading in them and the conversations we're having around the Conservation Ontario table is that it doesn't seem like a big deal, but the proof will be in the pudding as we try to execute them. So it's a stay tuned, because this is something we'll be dealing with in detail about 12 to 14 months from now as we start to work up the 2024 budget. And then attached, of course, is the 2021 annual report. And as with the Conservation Ontario annual report, if you have a read of it, I think you'll see we have had a very busy year, and a lot of really great work was accomplished, and we have a lot to be proud of as an organization. So thank you from all the employees for the support of the board the past year.
Thank you, Sally. Any questions for Sally? Faye?
Can't hear, Faye.
Sorry. It's the, what do you call that, lighter? Flight lines. Like, I'm not sure, is it on?
Yep.
That it takes in all of the Mississippi Valley jurisdiction.
So the area that you see in green was actually flown in the fall of last year. And if you just continue down, it's very faint in this particular printout, but there's a light blue lines that are hatched continuing south from there towards the red outline. And all that has now been flown. The entire watershed has been flown now. So we just received the data for what was flown in the fall, just in the past couple of weeks, and we anticipate getting the data for what was flown this spring later this year.
Okay, it's in, like in Beckwith, half of Beckwith is in Rita Valley and the other half is in Mississippi Valley.
But all of our Eastern Ontario, like all three, South Nation, Rideau, and ourselves participated in this project. So all of Beckwith should be done.
Okay.
Anyone else? Phil?
Yes, I know some people were concerned about the next year's budget, but in my experience, this LiDAR flying is going to be worth every penny you pay for it. I recently had to do a submission. I got a contour map from the Conservation Authority, which has saved me tens of hours of work. And it's much easier to understand than the engineer out there with the plotting the dots of where they're at. I would refer to the Geo Ottawa, which uses the LiDAR stuff 2 or 3 times a week. And so I just think for counselors and for members, they will find it well worth the dollars that were spent on this. So if you're out campaigning, somebody's grousing about the Conservation Authority budget, be sure to tell them that this will be really a worthwhile feature to have in your municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Go ahead, Sally.
Sorry, there's one other thing I wanted to mention. I can't recall if it's mentioned in my GM report, and that is that I've started going out to the municipalities, and we were actually up in your neck of the woods. I met with Lennox, Addington Highlands, North Frontenac, and Central Frontenac with the CAOs and the Reeves and mayors just on Monday. And we had a very good kickoff meeting in terms of the transition plans and working through the programs and services. And so I'll be coming out to your councils. All 3 municipalities requested that Brad from Quinte Conservation attend your councils in future to walk through the details. So the whole transition plan and presenting the programs and services has begun.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions. Any other business? I just have one. Our next board meeting is on June the 24th, and the watershed tour is back for that meeting. So will we be meeting here, or will we be meeting somewhere on the Carp watershed?
So we'll all meet here. We've rented a school bus, or in the process of renting a school bus, and we'll start at the headwaters to the Carp and work our way downstream and end up at Constance Bay. And there's any number of sites along the way. We are going to lunch incredibly affordably at Loch Marsh Golf Club. Apparently they have a very affordable lunch, so we'll be going there for lunch and then continuing north from there. So it looks like it'll be a full day. We have, I think, about 8 to 10 stops to show you folks various things, either issues or trends, or, for instance, the occasional violation.
I'm very much looking forward to that. And
Yep, that I think we have it meeting here at 9 o'clock, but we'll be issuing a detailed agenda for you all in the lead up to that next meeting. Did I get the date right, John? Is it the 20th? Oh, is it 15th? I was off. Sorry, my
15th?
apologies, 15th. Thank you.
So that's June the 15th. My bad, folks. Sally wrote it on my agenda. Yeah. So with that, there's no other business. It's time to adjourn. Could I have a motion, be it resolved that the Board of Directors meeting be adjourned? Got I have a mover? I'll pick Steve, so he get you in the minutes for your first meeting, and Roxanne. All in favor, please raise your hands. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.